I'm really passionate about patient education, and I know I touched on it earlier, but I really enforce the concept of eye exams being important regardless of whether or not you can see clearly. And I think a lot of the population's mentality is, oh, I can't see, I should get my eyes checked.
Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. Brought to you by Opticare. In each episode, we bring together leading eye care, optical and business professionals to share valuable insights, practical tips, and the latest trends shaping the optical business landscape. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore innovative strategies for practice growth, patient care, and business success in the eye care industry. Whether you're starting your career, managing a practice, or just looking to stay ahead of the field, The Focused View is your source for inspiration and knowledge. Welcome to the show, Alison.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, we're really excited to talk to you about the things that we're going to discuss today. But generally, the best way to kick things off is to let you tell us a bit about yourself and your story.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So I've known you since I was pretty much a first-year uni student. I went to UNSW, graduated with optometry and vision science, and decided when I graduated that I was going to go back and continue my studies over in New York City, which is where I did my final year placement. I did 4 years, a 4-month stint turned into 4 years there, where I learned a lot, got a lot of exposure to the American industry, met a lot of ophthalmologists, optometrists, and industry leaders from around the world, and then decided to bring my skills back and work locally here in Sydney, local to where I grew up in Peakhurst. So started my own practice there and been very happy.
And there's lots that we're going to break down in our conversation today because I feel like your journey's been a really interesting one. And as you mentioned, I've known you for quite a while, and through the uni years and seeing you now sort of doing what you're doing and kicking the goals that you're kicking, it's awesome to see. So to deep dive that, I think this is definitely an episode that a lot of students will find fascinating, and to see your journey and to learn from that and hopefully inspire them in terms of what their goals and plans are. But I guess from the first point, we've got this concept of, your desire to pursue independent optometry. And I think that's really a great one. So can you share with us what motivated you to choose independent optometry over, say, a corporate path?
Yeah, absolutely. I think pretty early on in my university career, I realized that I was more in line with the values that independent optometry holds. Basically, high-end patient care, getting to spend as much time as needed with each patient, working with the frames and brands that I choose to work with. That's all been a big part of my core at Lens Avenue, and pretty much why I decided to go into independent optometry. It's less chain, production chain, and more one-on-one with clients, and you get to build more of a rapport in my experience.
Absolutely. What would you say were the key factors that influenced you to make this decision? Or did something that happen naturally, or was it something that you witnessed or you saw, or was it, how did that develop?
So I actually worked for a corporate optometry practice as my first job in second year uni. I saw all my friends getting jobs as dispensers, and I thought, you know what, I should do that too, get some more exposure to the industry. And I worked for that corporate for approximately 2 months. I had been put on the floor by myself selling glasses on my first day with absolutely no experience. And I just thought to myself, you know what, I'm not learning much here. It seems very much like the equivalent to working at McDonald's. And I wanted to, expose myself to different practices before making a decision. For me personally, working in an independent as a dispenser was a completely different experience to that first job in a corporate practice. And I pretty much knew from day dot that that's where I wanted to be as a professional.
Yeah, and I think what's really important to note here is this is based on your experiences and what you went through. And I think what's key is that it's not, and I'm always pretty big on this, especially on this podcast, it's not to say one is better than the other. It's definitely not that at all. Everyone has a calling. Everyone has an avenue, I guess, similar to what resonates with them. And that's obviously something that, you resonated with from an early on piece. You mentioned that it felt different sort of working at the independent practice to the corporate practice. And what were some of the differences? I know you mentioned training there, so I felt like you thrown in and there wasn't perhaps adequate training. What were some of the things as well that you saw there that I guess for you highlighted the fact that this wasn't for you?
I guess for me, mainly the differences were noticed more when I stepped into the independent practice. and just seeing how the patient interactions differed. We got to spend more time, speaking and learning to a patient before just going ahead and picking out a frame. The frames we worked with, instead of having 1,000 of the same frame out back, we only had one of each frame, and the detail and craftsmanship that went into that frame were what was so special. It wasn't just something that was mass produced that we would sell 40 times a day. I think for me, those were the main differences as a student.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So towards the end of uni, I know something that was really big influence to yourself was New York, and you've already mentioned it. And so I really want to get into that. So tell me about it. What was it like working in Manhattan? Tell us about the experience and what was the working setup, and explain a bit more to us.
So in final year uni, we got to go on a placement, and I decided to go over to Bronx Eye up in the Bronx in New York. Went over with a few friends, and it was basically 40 to 60 patients a day. It was a very low socioeconomic area, so that we saw a lot of ocular pathology, a lot of different cultures and diseases that we probably will never see in our careers again in Australia, but a very large Russian population, for example. And so we just got exposed to every kind of disease, textbook stuff that you'll see on one page and never see again. And we got to see that in real life. Learning from 5 or 6 different optometrists at the peak of their career as well, seeing how they operated. So that was really impressive. And we just came back feeling like we had won the lottery.
When you said seeing how at the peak of their careers and operating at that particular level, what was it that you saw about them that I guess you took home from that experience?
They really practiced full scope and holistic optometry. It wasn't just, I'm seeing this in your eye, that's it, let's treat it, gone. It was, tell me more about your background, tell me about what you're eating, tell me about, the doctor's visits you've been having. I see this spot here on your face. Looking at the person as a whole and treating them and managing them in a much more medical sense to what the public perceives for optometry.
And that was your placement that you said for uni?
That was our placement.
And you went back, correct. Am I correct?
So they offered me an internship.
Tell us about that.
I worked there for a couple of months, and the placement was just for 4 months, but I, again, was working in a full scope practice, learning and growing as a professional, as a person. It was very trying times being there alone in the middle of winter initially. But my career there grew from that practice to a more boutique optometry setting, which was highly independent, very quirky, very fun. And then from there, I moved to my full-time job for 3.5 years, which was working in an ophthalmology practice and being the only optometrist in that setting.
Wow. Now, you mentioned that high end, because I know we referenced high end a few times, and you had some exposure there to a high end practice and quite quirky, and I guess maybe elements that you drew on or you're still drawing upon. But can you tell me about some of those high end industry experiences that you had while you were there?
Definitely. So the practice I'm referring to was in Brooklyn. The owner of the practice was actually the son of one of my favorite eyewear brands. Don't know if am I at liberty to say?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So the brand was Anne and Valentin. It's a beautiful French-made brand. It's boutique. So he was the son of that couple who started the brand. And so every piece of artwork in the practice, every piece of eyewear was like a piece of art. And essentially, we got to work with the best brands and some quite affluent people and clients.
Right. And the take home from that, I guess, was the fact that they were focusing on this high end, I guess, and it's probably something that we're not accustomed to here in particular, but I guess that exposure just made you see things in a different light.
Yeah. I think when you're selling glasses, you can either, sell a frame and lenses, or you can sell an experience. And for me, what I learned from that experience was it's a very personal decision, and you can make it so special for somebody. So that's what I've taken back home, and I've applied those concepts at Lens Avenue, and it seems to be working well.
Yeah, and I guess it kind of speaks back to that holistic approach to everything too. And so you've obviously got that clinical side of holistic mindset that you saw, and now you're seeing it from the retail side of the business too, and how that can be quite unique and custom to the individual as well. So that makes total sense. You mentioned the fact that you then spent 3.5 years with a clinic that had ophthalmologists, and you were the only optom that was there. Can you explain more about that experience and what was that like, and how did your exposure to those various specializations, I guess, help shape your professional skills?
So the ophthalmology clinic specialized in general ophthalmology, but also in oculoplastics, cataract surgery, refractive surgeries, and also plastics in general. So you can imagine the clientele that came through the doors. It was a Fifth Avenue practice across the road from the Met Museum. So beautiful location, and again, Upper East Side. So very gossip girl.
What does Upper East Side mean? Sorry, I'm not very. I mean, I've been to New York a few times, but Upper East Side is a term I've heard of. But what does that mean? Can you expand on that a bit for me?
It's Park Avenue, it's Saks Fifth Avenue, it's Central Park. Exclusive. Yeah, very high end.
Gotcha.
The most beautiful apartments, wide streets, clean. Very different to the grungy New York that you've probably also seen. Yeah. So that practice was very, very high end. In terms of the quality of care given to patients, we had princes from all over the world getting flown to our practice specifically to see our doctors. Wow. For me, as an optometrist there, my role was alongside growing the optical business, so selling frames, selling lenses, fitting contact lenses. I also got a lot of exposure to surgeries and fitting specialty contact lenses. So patients with lid malformations, people who had damaged corneas, I would be fitting scleral lenses there. And that was something that the ophthalmologists didn't want to do. And I got very good at as a result.
You spent quite a bit of time there too, so you would have seen a whole heap of different, I guess, conditions and different scenarios. What specific lessons did you learn from that particular practice, and I guess your overall experience in New York, and what did you bring back to Australia from that point of view?
Number one, I think it speaks to anyone's experience moving overseas, but particularly for the optometry industry. Resilience, learning to think on your feet, learning to adapt to a situation. Obviously, I went through quite a few jobs before I found the place where I was happy. I think finding the practice that worked for me was a big part of why I stayed in New York for so long. And so I wanted to really create that same environment and curate that experience for myself here in Sydney. Moving back, taking those little tidbits and little pieces of advice I'd learned from each of the doctors and applying it to my own practice and making sure I stuck by those values.
And just out of curiosity, it's more of a general question. Did you notice that, I guess, the optometry sector over there different? I mean, you hadn't had much exposure to the Australian sector, I guess, at that stage. But I guess answering it with the experience you have now, do you see much of a difference in the industry there compared to here, or is it quite similar? Are they more advanced, or how would you summarize the differences?
The main difference, I think, would be therapeutically. They're a lot more advanced. They're onto different drugs sooner than we are, and their contact lenses get released there a couple of years before they arrive here. But in general, I think Australia is definitely heading the same direction. Our optometrists are so well educated and we're exposed to a lot before we graduate, which I think is really important in keeping up with the industry globally.
And I guess on the experience, because we'll jump into what you've done now that you're back at home and what you've set up here. But I guess for students in particular that are at that final stage, I'm not sure how common it is for people to go overseas and do placement overseas, if it's common or not common. But I guess what would you say to uni students that are listening to this now that are approaching that particular phase or considering it? Like, what advice would you have for them?
It's definitely daunting doing something different to what 99.9% of the cohort tends to do. But if you have the opportunity to go overseas and to even experience it on placement or work for a couple of months, years, it's definitely something I would recommend. I think the experiences I had, and at the time when I was making the decision, I was so afraid because all these job offers were on the table and all my friends were signing their contracts. And I was like, what do I think I'm doing? Like going overseas and, accepting very little pay initially and not having security and not having family. And it was very overwhelming and very daunting. But looking back, it was the best decision I had ever made. And I would recommend it for anyone who has the opportunity presented to them.
What you touched on there is probably a topic in its own right, which is what decisions are there for students at the end? And it's very much seeing what I've seen from that point of view, it seems like there's not many decisions, that there's only one or two, and it's very much corporate dominated, and there are reasons for that. But I think the fact that you've been able to go beyond that and look at something a bit different has created something totally unique for yourself and an experience that obviously sounds like you're never going to forget and are totally grateful for. If we relate that back now to what you've done here back at home, you mentioned that the practice that you worked in for 3.5 years was on 5th Avenue. Obviously, I'm starting to dot the pieces here, dot the lines and put the dots together with regards to that's the inspiration for your practice name, which
Lens Avenue.
That's right. Yeah. So tell me, what inspired you to start Lens Avenue? And is it something that you always harbored, or is it something that I guess was reaffirmed when you were overseas?
Yeah, I think having graduated, it was always my plan to come back, whether it was that 4 months or straight away, and start my own place. I would have loved to have secured a job at an independent practice, and the offers were there, but I don't think I was ready at that time. Looking back and moving to New York and coming back to Sydney, it was definitely, there was no doubt in my mind that that's what I wanted to do. As I said, I wanted to really foster the skills that I had learned and what people skills as well as clinical skills, and just put that into my own practice and make it something of my own.
And can you walk me through the initial steps and challenges of setting up a greenfield practice? It's something that we've mentioned in the past. You basically started from ground up, and it's, I guess the decision to go to New York is brave, and a bit of a character trait here of yours. You make a lot of brave decisions, and it's quite inspiring. So tell me about those initial steps and those initial challenges, and, including maybe some of the barriers people probably were telling you at the time about how maybe it wasn't a good idea.
Yeah, I think coming back just after COVID, I was sort of still in lockdown, and I was planning on opening up in Pecos Heights, this high-end boutique practice. And everyone was like, are you crazy? What are you doing? It's a huge investment of time and money. And the area is not known for being, a high-end sort of area. You hear of Double Bay and Bullar, and that makes sense. But Pecos Heights didn't really fit the bill. And I kind of just thought to myself, well, I'm the one that's going to be running it. I'm going to be the business initially. And this is what I believe in, and this is what I want to do, and this is where I want it to be. Of course, it was very difficult at the start. You're brand new. No one knows who you are.
Yeah.
And getting people to walk in the door and agree to let you test their eyes, that's a whole obstacle in itself. But I think in general, just sticking to what I believed in, sticking to my roots, and educating any single person that would listen. This is why our eye exams here are worth getting anyone who walked in the door to listen and educate them on why they need this kind of eye exam and what our equipment does that's different to every other practice or most other practices, and why they should let me and trust me to be their optometrist, and most importantly, why they should buy these really beautiful, crazy colored, quirky frames.
And the frames that you're speaking or that you're wearing today, I guess, are a little bit of a representation of some of the stock that you probably carry, and they're definitely eye-catching, and they're definitely, I can see what you're about and when you wear frames like that, and it's great. Now, when you mentioned this whole concept of having a point of difference, you're establishing your ability there to sell or what you're providing, the service that you're providing. When we're starting businesses, and I'm sure you're probably told the same, and build a niche or start a niche or create something that's a little bit unique, and I'm not sure if you did business plans and things like that. I guess if we take you back to that moment, was there something that you identified that was going to make you different to anyone else? Obviously, we can speak to some of the things that you'd learned, but was there anything in particular that you had in mind that was going to be like, what, I'm going to be totally different? And what was that?
For me, I think it was the frames we carried in our selection. We don't have a very wide range. Obviously, we have a small selection to cater to everybody, but we really wanted to cater to those looking for something unique and different. And our selection is 99% high-end, cool, quirky frames. And I think that identifies us as Lens Avenue.
Yeah, I get the elements of New York there, Upper East Side, I guess, Upper East Side vibes. So it's a bit like that. And I guess as an independent, you've got the ability there to create that path and to realize that. And obviously seeing and again, I keep an eye on the States too with regards to practices and what they're doing. And what I've seen is a lot of those independents are doing something similar to what you're doing, where they're really niching themselves as a high end. And the perception of an area being high end or not, I mean, at the end of the day, it depends on how you're positioning your business, and you end up attracting people that resonate with that as well. And then I guess you got the word of mouth, and I can imagine that's how your store has developed and evolved over time. And I guess leading into that, what strategies did you use to attract your clients to begin with, and how are you retaining them as well?
Yeah, so initially it was a lot of social media, really trying to build that presence on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I know it sounds trivial and very uncommon for optometry clinics, but I think what we're selling is, at the end of the day, we're a retail store. We're selling our glasses. So we really just wanted to showcase and show people what we were carrying and what that point of difference was. Google's also been very powerful for us. We were really big on just friendly asking people anytime they came in, if we felt comfortable enough, would you mind leaving us a Google review? It really helps our small business grow.
Well, on that note, and I'm glad you mentioned it because it was something I wanted to highlight. I mean, as it stands, you've got 103 5-star reviews on Google, and I think that's a fantastic achievement. It points to a strategy that I imagine you had with that. And can you explain to me how you were able to do this? Because I feel like it's probably something a lot of people can learn from.
Yeah, and it is quite humbling to see people actually enjoying what we're doing and what we're putting out into the world. So having that positive feedback has been amazing to see. From the get-go, obviously, it's a lot of friends and family coming through the door, especially with a greenfield practice. It's hard to attract strangers. And so anytime a family member came through or a friend came through, it was super easy to say, would you mind? It takes 3 seconds, just 5-star review. Or 4, if that's what you think of us.
Well, I think you can't force them to give you 5 stars. It's like, just give us some feedback and be honest
give us
with
an honest review. So initially it was really easy with friends and family. I think any nice patients, they're happy to do it, especially if they're happy with the services you're providing. They're more than happy to jump on. They know it's helpful. It takes them 3 seconds, but the impact it has on the business is huge.
Do you make that process easy in the store? Like, do you have like a QR code, or do you have anything that, or you just say, just Google us and just leave a review on?
Yeah. No, I've thought about the QR code, but we get a lot of elderly people.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess what I see from that is the fact that you weren't afraid to ask. And I think a lot of times in practices, there's that mindset, oh, I feel bad to ask, or I shouldn't ask. And so I think just in the fact of asking, I think, you'd be surprised. And all independent business owners in particular have friends and family. And so even though you were new and you started out doing that, even if it's an established practice that's listening to this, friends and family are always the first go-to when it comes to things like this. So even if they're looking at improving their Google reviews or it's something, it's the first people you go to. Obviously, you might have your top customers too, but friends and family, I think in that scenario can definitely make a difference, because it is impressive when you see that. And it's definitely a metric that people are looking at when they're assessing businesses and who they're going to see. They say somebody's got 100 reviews and someone's got 3 reviews. I mean, if you're basing on reviews, you know what the decision is going to be. Something you mentioned as well was social media, and people are liking what you're putting out to the world. How do you see social media has played a role in your practice with the growth and the patient engagement?
I think it's a way, because in optometry, we see our patients, if we're lucky, once a year. Most commonly, it's once every 2 to 3 years. So it's a way to keep patients engaged and seeing your content frequently, as opposed to seeing them once, letting them walk away for 2 years. They might forget about you. You could be the best optometrist in the whole world, but people are busy. People have 15 other medical appointments and cafes they go to, and it's very hard to make a long-lasting impression in that 20 minutes or 30 minutes that you're given in the room. So I think social media for us has just been a way to keep engaged with our audience in that time between appointments and make sure we're always front of mind when they're thinking of buying glasses.
Yeah, I love that construct that you just illustrated, because it's just another way of thinking, okay, I'm spending more time with my patients. And so I've only got a 20 or 30 minute window, but if they're engaging in my content and if it's a minute and they're seeing 10 of them, well, that's an extra 10 minutes a year that I'm spending with them, and they're getting to know about me and the service and my point of difference. So I think when you construct like that, it makes total sense. The other thing, and I was thinking about this before we jumped on, I was like, you're in the fortunate position, obviously, probably one of the more younger business owners in the industry with regards to, where you're at. And because you've got the ability of your own business, you actually have the freedom to really push this. You'll tend to find that social media as an avenue or as a path with regards to a practice, incorporating it. If they're an older business owner, they're probably not as comfortable. And I use that term obviously as for a lack of a better, but being younger, being that mindset of, probably more involved in social media just in general, incorporating that in, and you've got the freedom and flexibility to do it, so you can really play it. Whereas if you're a new grad and you've gone into a corporate or you've gone into someone else's, you're probably not going to have the freedom that you had. I guess if you touch on that experience, did that help you at all, or did you feel like that enabled you to do more than what most could or would?
Yeah, and I think also being a new practice definitely pushed me to want to go down the social media route and really kind of focus on my marketing. Whereas if I was in a more established practice or in a corporate, often they've got huge marketing budgets anyway. So they're doing all the work for you, and those patients are coming through the door regardless of what they see on social media. But I think it was just really important for like any small business, whether independent optometry practice or not, it is really important to have that consistent engagement, because we don't have the huge marketing budgets and we're not on TV commercials and on the radio and newspaper. So that's a really nice free way to keep engaged with the client.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. Something that I think that you brought back, or something that you've brought back into the practice, and maybe it's from the experience that you've had, was this concept on the focus on eye health. And I guess I'd probably refer to as, the focus on eye health as opposed to a bulk billing mindset. Why did you choose to focus on comprehensive eye health rather than more of that bulk billing model practice?
I'm really passionate about patient education, and I know I touched on it earlier, but I really enforce the concept of eye exams being important regardless of whether or not you can see clearly. And I think a lot of the population's mentality is, oh, I can't see, I should get my eyes checked, as opposed to I should get my eyes checked because it's something I should do annually. And I think for me, when I show someone what a comprehensive eye health exam looks like, they're super impressed by it, for starters, because they don't get to see this stuff every day. We see it day in, day out. We're immune to looking at a retina. But for someone who's not seen it before, it's so impressive. And I think they can then understand how intricate the eye is and why it's so important to have their eyes checked. Now, I value my time as any optometrist in our industry should. And unfortunately, the Medicare rebate doesn't, I don't know how to say this politely,
adequately cover the time that you need to conduct a comprehensive.
If I'm spending my time and energy explaining and educating a patient, I believe that any optometrist should be reimbursed for that time adequately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with that. And I feel like that's a notion that everyone in the industry has the same feeling about. So I don't think you'd have any objectors there. You mentioned education. How do you educate your patient about the importance of eye examinations or a thorough eye exam?
I do get quite aggressive on this front, especially with my elderly population.
Passionate,
I'm very passionate about it. If someone tells me they can see well, honestly, I just force them to sit down in the chair and explain to them what can go wrong. All of these diseases, this spectrum of diseases, are asymptomatic until it's too late. And the only way that they're being picked up is through an eye exam. And so I think just explaining and showing and X, Y, and Z, macular degeneration, glaucoma, even diabetic retinopathy to an extent, like a lot of the changes we see as optometrists aren't symptomatic to the patient. And so until they're aware of that, every arrow points to vision's not good, eye exam. But I think slowly we just have to get the word out.
Yep. I guess drawing to the end of the podcast here, what advice would you give to other optometrists that are looking to start their own independent practice?
Do it. I think the more
nice
that's
and short.
My advice.
Just do it.
I think if it's something you're passionate about, it's obviously a lot of work and a lot of time, a lot of energy. It's definitely a lot easier to go in, get a paycheck and go home. But I think I found the most fulfillment in optometry when I started my own practice. I really saw the benefit of this is the culmination of all my skills, business and otherwise, put together. And this is my project where I can shape it to be whatever I want. I think if you're passionate about something and you have a certain level of authenticity that you can put into that practice, it's going to do well. The tide's changing. People want to see people succeed and they want to support local. They want to support small business, and they're more than happy to come in and have a chat and give you their support if you show them that that's what you're passionate about.
Yeah. It's interesting you say the tide's changing, because I agree with you on that. And even from the context of the businesses that I sort of operate, I definitely feel that it's that there is a little bit of movement, a bit of a shift there in mindset of people. And it's really exciting to see. Do you have any final thoughts or messages that you want our listeners to share with our listeners, I guess, as a parting message?
Yeah, I think as an industry, we just need to come together. We're a small industry. We all pretty much know each other at this point. If we all stand up and fight for what we believe in and educate each other, educate our patients and band together, we're in a great field. We're surrounded by great people. everyone's happy to help each other out. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I think lean on each other and support each other because we're all in it together.
Yeah, I love that message. And on that note, how can listeners get in touch with you if they do want to sort of learn more about your journey or get some advice or tips hearing what they've heard today?
So Instagram, it's Ali Daoud, Daoud. Otherwise, Lens Avenue Optometry. You can send me an email, reach out to Michael, and he'll give you all my details. But more than happy to answer any questions. Those
details will be in the show notes. So if anyone wants to reach out, please feel free to access the show notes and get those details there. Alison, thank you so much for your time. Your story is really inspiring. I love hearing it, and I hope that it inspires someone today that's listening to it to get out there and, as you said, just do it. So it's great. So thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
Stay connected by subscribing to The Focused View and visiting our website www.thefocusedview.com.au for additional resources and episode summaries. We look forward to your company again in our next episode. Until then, keep focused. I'm Michael Nasser. Bye for now.